What if the scenes you're most proud of are the ones silently killing your story? After breaking down hundreds of comments and drawing insights from my writing guild and private coaching, I've identified the most damaging story choices that turn fantasy readers off fast. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to spot the hidden mistakes that sabotage immersion, even in your strongest scenes, why most writing advice fails fantasy writers like you and what to do instead, and why this might be the breakthrough you've been waiting for if your writing feels solid but still stuck. To start, let me show you how to avoid the kind of character choices that quietly collapse your story's emotional core, no matter how epic your world is. Picture this, you're halfway through a novel. The rogue character, the one who's been closed off, grumpy, and quick to stab someone, suddenly volunteers to babysit a toddler and open up about their tragic past over soup. There's no build-up, no tension, just feelings. You probably sit there blinking, like the author just slapped a new personality onto the character mid-scene and hoped no one would notice. But why does this feel so wrong? It's because the moment breaks the heart of the story. Not because it's too soft or too dramatic, but because it wasn't earned. The character didn't walk the bridge to vulnerability. They were shoved off the cliff for plot reasons. And here's the deeper problem when this happens. Readers stop believing, not just in the character, but in the author's control of the story. So how do you make sure your characters don't break themselves just to serve your outline? First, know what drives them. Not in a vague he's sad because trauma kind of way. I mean down to the core. What's their shame, their pride? What invisible line would they never let anyone cross even if they don't know it yet? Then build micro conflicts that reveal tension. Let's say a protagonist is a control freak. Don't wait for the big showdown to test that. Show them losing control in tiny ways, a broken cup, a missed meeting, a companion who improvises and wins. That's where the cracks start. Also make sure to use emotional inertia. People don't pivot on a dime. If your warrior starts the book emotionally closed, they don't spill their heart just because a side character dies. They might flinch or grunt or change the subject. Emotional change happens through pressure, then silence, then a shift. As a fourth step, let gestures do the talking. A character who won't say "I'm scared" might glance at the door twice, might fake a yawn to avoid answering, might clean a weapon that doesn't need cleaning. Readers don't need exposition when the body already tells the truth. And lastly, anchor action in contradiction. When a character does something out of character, make sure the reason comes from inside them, not from your need to move the plot. If your rule-following knight betrays the king, it better be because they've reached the breaking point of what their code allows, not because chapter 12 needed a twist. But even characters with bulletproof psychology can't save a story if the world they live in feels like a textbook. I've seen fantasy books where the magic system is so detailed it feels like someone ripped the appendix out of a D&D manual and duct taped it to a plot. By chapter 3, you know the full taxonomic structure of elemental permutations, but not why the magic matters. It means nothing to the protagonist, nothing to the world, not even apparently to the person writing it. And here's the thing, I like rule-heavy systems in some stories. I've built them, I teach how to make them sing. But structure alone doesn't create meaning. Just because a magic system has logic doesn't mean it has narrative gravity. When magic means something, costs something, it stops being trivia and starts being story. That doesn't mean stripping complexity, it means charging it. We don't need the blueprint for how fireballs are summoned before we care. We need to see what it takes out of the person who casts it. The guilt, the fear, the isolation. We need a world where people deal with the consequences of magic. And even in the most rigid systems, I'd urge you to leave some room for the unknown. Edge cases, myth, gaps in understanding. Mystery makes the rules feel heavier, and if those rules tie into what the story is really about, that's when magic stops being a feature and starts being the heart. When it feels baked into the story, not just sitting on top, readers stop skimming and they start caring. But no matter how well your magic works, it won't save your story if the tone pulls the rug out from under the emotion. So next, I'll show you why the wrong joke in the wrong moment kills more tension than any plot hole ever could. You remember that moment in Thor Ragnarok when Bruce Banner hurls himself from the spaceship ready to transform into the Hulk mid-fall and just faceplants onto the bridge like a wet sack of laundry? The audience laughs. Then the scene cuts back to gods bleeding, stakes rising, war drums pounding. But something broke here. Bruce didn't just hit the bridge. The tension snapped, and with it, the emotional rhythm. We were supposed to feel the cost, instead we got a pratfall. That's the kind of humor that barges in during serious moments and ruins them with a bad punchline. Now, I'm not anti-humor. The real problem starts when the joke isn't part of the world, it's just a wink at the audience. when it exists purely to nudge the audience and say, hey, don't worry, we're not actually taking this seriously. Then it rips right through the emotional fabric you spent chapters weaving. So how do you keep readers laughing without cheapening your big emotional payoffs? It starts with where the joke is coming from. If it's your voice trying to undercut tension because the moment feels too heavy, pull back. But if it's your character grasping for control through sarcasm or absurdity, that's a gift. A thief smirking at death doesn't kill the scene, it amplifies it. The joke becomes a lens into their fear, their defiance, their need. Tone isn't a switch you flip, it's a mix like music. You can let grief and dark humor run side by side, as long as they don't clash. The real danger is when a joke undercuts the emotional current instead of layering onto it. Sometimes that means trusting silence, letting a beat land, holding that breath before you twist the mood. And of course, all of this hinges on timing. A perfectly good line can ruin a moment if it hits a second too early, or too late. But drop it into the right pocket of tension, and it's magic. It's not just funny, it's human. But tool dissonance isn't just about misplaced comedy. Sometimes the real killer is too much information at the wrong time. Imagine you're starving and sitting down to the best smelling meal of your life. But just as you're about to take a bite, someone starts explaining how the carrots were julienned, which farm the potatoes came from, and the proper method of clarifying butter. 10 minutes in, you still haven't eaten. You're just nodding politely, eyes glazing over, wondering if this is what death feels like. That's what a reader experiences when your story holds for a lore dump. Now, this isn't about readers being lazy or anti-depth. Fantasy readers adore complexity. They want to understand your world, but they want to feel it, not sit through a lecture on its socioeconomic structure before anyone even draws a sword. When you front-load your world building like that, you're asking readers to invest in data they haven't yet been given a reason to care about. World building shouldn't slow the story. It is the story, if you do it right. So first, use what I call the 3 R's: remnants, routines, and reactions. Show the world's age with worn symbols on a shield. Let us learn the culture through daily rituals like a prayer before battle or the kind of tea someone refuses to share. And let us see the characters react to their world with familiarity or fear. Second then, embed world building into conflict. Don't pause the plot to describe your magic guild's hierarchy. Show the apprentice breaking rank to save a civilian and suffering the consequences. Now we know the rules, the stakes, and the power structure, all inside drama. And third, think of setting like subtext. Let your environment whisper things the prose never says outright. A city built in concentric rings doesn't need an explanation if the poor live in the smoke-choked outer rim and the nobles bathe in light at the center. The metaphor is baked right into the geography here. Finally, remember that discovery is part of the light. Holding back can actually make your world more compelling. Don't explain every myth, every beast, every war. Let the reader feel the outline of something larger. The best fantasy, if you ask me, always feels like there's one more page just out of sight. But even if your world feels real, your tension will collapse if the characters keep walking into drama they could fix with one honest sentence. Have you ever watched 2 characters argue in a book and think, if you 2 just sat down and talked like semi-functioning adults, we could all go home early? It's like watching someone build tension out of spaghetti. One push and the whole thing collapses. Now, I'm not saying miscommunication doesn't happen. It absolutely does, in life and in fiction. But if your plot only works because everyone involved suddenly forgets how to use words, then we have a problem. That's not conflict, that's avoidance in costume. And readers aren't buying it. What they actually want isn't silence, it's struggle. They want to see characters trying and failing to connect, trying and failing to make themselves understood. That's where the emotional juice lives. Not in dodging a conversation, but in walking straight into one and watching it break down anyway. So how do you write conflicts that's rich with miscommunication without making readers throw the book across the room? The trick is to stop treating silence like a shortcut. Let it come from somewhere. Shame, pride, the fear of being fully seen. Maybe a character lies not because they are hiding something, but because they are trying to protect someone. Or maybe they speak the truth, but the other person hears betrayal. That's where the real stakes live. Not in people failing to talk, but in people trying their damnedest and still missing each other. But here's the thing, sometimes even when your conflict is spot on, your character arc still falls flat. Have you ever read a book where the character supposedly is affected by what's happening to them, but somehow feels exactly the same in the final chapter as they did in the first? The prose tells you they've grown, the climax insists they've evolved, but you just don't feel it, because nothing inside them actually moved. It's like watching someone stand in place for 10 hours and then pretending they ran a marathon. The time is there, the progress is not. Real growth, the kind that lingers, comes from friction, from failures, from moments that force a character to choose between who they were and who they are becoming. And you can't fake that, because readers don't track change by word count. They track it by emotional math, by witnessing someone want something, lose something, risk something, and watching how that shifts the weight of their choices over time. First, start with emotional waypoints. These are visible internal pivots that mark progress. If your character starts out bitter and guarded, don't skip straight to them giving heartwarming speeches by Act 3. Show them choosing to listen instead of lash out. Show them hesitating before rejecting help, and then maybe accepting it. These are micro shifts, and they matter more than declarations sometimes. Next, make the arc relational. Change rarely happens in a vacuum. Put your character in relationships that challenge their assumptions, push their boundaries, and force reflection. This could be a mentor they disappoint, a rival they unexpectedly respect, or a friend they almost lose. Emotional growth lives in the space between people. And from here, raise the emotional stakes. Growth means risk. If your war-hardened general opens up, what do they fear that vulnerability will cost? What armor must they shed to move forward, and who might strike if they do? And as the last step, echo the change. Don't let it vanish after the climax. Let us see how the character lives differently afterward, the choices they make, the words they catch before speaking, the wounds they still carry but now carry differently. That's how you show the journey mattered. But emotional arcs aren't the only thing that demand careful attention, of course. Because even when your protagonist is on fire, one ill-timed piece of slang can break immersion like a sledgehammer through a stained glass window. Imagine reading a beautifully written fantasy novel, lyrical prose, sweeping stakes, and then in the middle of a tense scene between two brooding sorcerers, one of them turns to the other and says, "Yeah, that spell was kinda sus." Instantly, it's like the story takes a hard left into a Discord chat. All that tension? Gone. You're not in the scene anymore. You're back in your chair cringing. Now, I'm not here to sneer at slang. Language evolves and I love that it does. But when your fantasy world is carefully constructed, when your tone leans mythic or immersive, and your character suddenly sounds like they just logged off TikTok, it's not adding depth. It's yanking the reader out of the story. You see, readers don't just listen to what's said, they hear who is speaking. And the wrong voice in the wrong mouth can snap the spine of immersion in a single beat. So how do you craft dialogue that feels sharp without sounding shallow, especially in a fantasy setting? The key is to make sure every line of dialogue feels like it came from that character in that world, not from a group chat. Instead of reaching for slang that's trendy now, reach for language that reflects who the speaker is and how they've lived. A pirate doesn't warn like a priest. A mercenary doesn't plead like a prince. Let their metaphors come from the battlefield, the pulpit, the gutter. And when you write it, say it out loud. If it snaps you out of the world you're building, it will snap the reader out too. But even if your dialogue sings, your story's heart can still fall flat if the romance feels stapled on. Consider you're picking up a fantasy novel where two characters lock eyes across a battlefield, share maybe 3 lines of charged dialogue, and then in the final chapter they are suddenly making out like their lips are solving world's hunger. No build-up, no tension, just narrative gravity deciding these two must now kiss. It just doesn't work that way. I'm all for a good love story. I've written them, I've rooted for them. But romance in fiction doesn't work like pairing socks. You can't just throw 2 attractive characters into a scene and assume chemistry will happen by proximity. Great fictional relationships don't feel forced. They feel like the only outcome that ever made sense. Romance at its core is friction, not dramatic declarations or slow-mo kisses, but the ache of being seen, of being challenged, of not knowing if the other person will step closer or walk away. In fantasy where dragons fly and kingdoms fall, that quiet, human tension matters even more. Because the more heightened the world, the more grounded the emotions need to be. So strip it back. Instead of writing toward the kiss, write toward a shift, a glance that lingers too long, conversation that accidentally brushes against something raw, a moment where one character chooses to listen when they could have turned away. Those are your building blocks. Not grand gestures, not destiny, but friction, vulnerability, curiosity. Maybe they don't trust each other yet. Maybe they shouldn't. That's the good stuff. And if you want real chemistry, put something at stake. Not their hearts, not yet. Their beliefs, their goals, their sense of who they are when the other person is in the room. Let them earn each other through scraped knuckles, missed chances, and on conversations that almost go too far. If you're halfway through your book and they still haven't touched, but the reader is screaming for it, then you're doing it right. But here's the thing, no matter how rich the romance, it falls apart if your hero can snap their fingers and just fix everything. Some fantasy stories treat power like stacking chairs. Each new ability just gets thrown on top, flight, telepathy, summoning storms, until the whole thing wobbles under its own weight. And then the story collapses. Not because the magic is broken, because the tension is. The real issue isn't how strong your hero is, it's what their strength means. To them, to others, to the world. Power without resistance isn't power, it's noise. There's no fear, no risk, no room to wonder what happens if they fail, or worse, if they succeed. If you want that power to mean something, you've got to make it hurt. You anchor that power in friction again. Maybe it ages them, maybe it distances them. Maybe it works perfectly, but only when they sacrifice something they value more. The point here isn't punishment, it's pressure. Something that reshapes them every time they draw on it. As a second step, then reframe the battlefield. If your hero can break bones with a glance, stop throwing bones at them. Test their judgment, their restraint, their loneliness. Build conflict they can't just blast through even if the temptation is there. Especially if the temptation is there. And make sure to show the long arc here. Don't just let power grow, let it evolve, let it twist. Make characters wonder if they're becoming something they hate. It's no longer just can I or even should I, it becomes something deeper. What kind of person does that make me? That's where tension lives, and that's what lingers. But even when your hero bears that weight beautifully, the whole story can still crumble if it doesn't land the final emotional beat. There's this peculiar silence that happens when a book ends too abruptly. You close the cover and just sit there. Not because you're stunned or moved, but because you're confused. Did I miss a chapter? Was there a misprint? Are they seriously ending it here? It's like going to a symphony, waiting for that final swelling note, and instead the conductor just walks off stage mid-crescendo. The resolution never comes. The emotional echo never hits. Just a dropped curtain and a faint sense of betrayal. And here's the kicker, it's often not because the writer didn't have something powerful to say, because they didn't leave space to say it. They hit the last point and mistook it for the final beat. But plot is not the end. What makes us feel after it's over is. A lasting ending doesn't scream, it exhales. Think of your ending like a breath, not a bang, not a twist. A quiet moment that holds everything your characters went through, what they won, what they lost, what changed. Even in stories with high action, your final moments need some downbeat. That pause that tells the readers this mattered. And when you're at that point, use echo. Mirror something from the beginning, but bent by the journey. Maybe the character returns to the same place but walks differently now. Maybe a phrase once spoken in defiance now lands as forgiveness. Echoes show us something really changed. They close the loop without spelling it out. Another thing to consider is to trace the aftermath, not in a long-winded epilogue necessarily, but in ripple effects. How was the world shifted? Who remembers the fallen? What's been left behind and what's just begun? If your protagonist saves the world, but no one reacts, the story ends in a vacuum. Give us a flicker of the world processing what just happened. The best endings don't just finish the story, they stay with us, they remind us why it mattered. But even the most unforgettable ending can't save a story if the foundation feels lazy. And nothing telegraphs lazy faster than the misuse of one of fantasy's most iconic creatures. Some dragons soar, others just sit there. Majestic, useless. I've read books where the dragon is teased on page 1, ancient, terrifying, the last of its kind. By the end, it's still perched on a mountain like a lawn ornament with lore. That's the problem here. Too many fantasy stories treat dragons like they're meaningful just because they are dragons. As if the scales and wings do all the narrative lifting. You see, they don't. A dragon that doesn't shape the world, test the characters, or shift the story's momentum might as well just be wallpaper. Glorious, fire-breathing wallpaper. That's not to say that dragons need constant page time. Some of the most effective ones barely appear at all, but their presence is felt. Their choices ripple, their existence changes how everyone acts. And that's the difference. When readers love dragons, they don't love the aesthetic. They love the agency, the mystery, the symbolic weight. Smaug isn't just a lizard with a gem collection in The Hobbit. He's the rod at the heart of a kingdom's greed. Great dragons aren't decorations, they are declarations. Which means if you're putting a dragon in your story, make it count. A dragon should shift the temperature of the world around it, the rules, the tension, the moral center. Maybe it's a god to some, a weapon to others. Maybe it's sentient, maybe it's dying. But it needs to matter to someone other than you. One trick I use? Pretend the dragon's a person. Give it a motive, an ethic, regret. Even if it never speaks, the decisions it makes, or doesn't, should reveal something. Let it become a mirror for your world's fear, wonder, or hunger. And suddenly it's not a dragon anymore, it's a force of transformation. Because that's what dragons are at their best. Not just beasts, but boundaries between what is and what could be. Okay, we've covered what readers hate, but if any of these hit close to home, that's not failure, that's an opportunity. Because the gap between what your story is and what it could be, that's where the magic happens. At the end of the day, that's what fantasy readers want. Not just cool ideas, but trust in the hands guiding them. And if you want to build worlds, characters, and magic systems that earn that trust from page 1, then watch this video here next, where I walk you through the exact process I use to design immersive worlds and emotionally resonant plots.